So I'm just happy to introduce to you the panel of this session. Bas Vercruysse of Ghent University, Christian Cote of the University of Lyon, and Alexandre Faye of the French National Library, Sharon Healy of the Maynooth University, and Juan-José Boté-Vericad of the University of Barcelona. And I'm not sure if Helena Byrne of the British Library is also here. But let's start with the 1 minute summary of the video of Bas. So Bas, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Bas Vercruysse. I'm a master's student at the Ghent University, and I'm doing my research about the history of the Belgian national domain. So I'm trying to figure out what exactly happened during the late 80s and beginning of the 90s. And I'm just trying to find every weird thing, every interesting thing that happened and made the Belgian internet what it is today.
I'm Christian Cote from Lyon, and I am a researcher, and we have collected a web archive for the web literature in France, in Francophone domain. As we are working with the Marge laboratory and the BNF, the National Library of France, in collaboration with another staff of informaticians. Okay.
Yeah, my name is Alexandre Faye. I'm curator at the French National Library in the Legal Deposit Department. And I'm also in charge of assistance to researchers. That's why I work with Christian. And the Lifranum project, so Lifranum stands for Digital French-Speaking Literature. This project focuses on French-speaking literature on the web, which is a practice shared by both amateurs and professional writers. So the research team has built an online registry, and the BNF got also a collection headed by our department in art and literature. So we shared the data, and we decided to carry out 2 collections because both partners launched their own crawl. So there is a web archive in Lyon and a web archive at the BNF. So the researcher used Electrics for crawling the web, and also they have an instance of Solar Webback, actually.
Thank you very much. And then there's the wrap of our last session. I think Juan-José will elaborate on that.
Yes, hello, good morning. This is Juan-José from the University of Barcelona. And I majorly do research in digital preservation. And we have done work with Sharon, Healy, and Helena Byrne, who is also the camera off. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I saw Helena is here as well. That's great. Welcome, everybody. So now we'll start the Q&A. So again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat for the Q&A. So on the Q&A tab, there's also a possibility to do this anonymously. So if you want to, you can use that as well. And if you see any of the questions that you would like to have answered, you can upvote them. So please make use of that. But first, let me start with the first question. And I did prepare some questions, but Bas said something very interesting. You said that you were looking for weird things. So I was wondering, can you share one of these weird things with us?
I think the weirdest thing I had already mentioned in my presentation is the attack on the network that some hackers tried to do. It was a very bizarre story, because newspapers wrote very different things about it. And even internally, there were some different stories of how it exactly went. So it was a bit, for me, it was a challenge to figure out what exactly happened. And that was notably a weird thing that happened in Belgian internet history.
Did you stumble upon this by accident, or did you knew that this had happened? And that you wanted to dive into it?
I had different interviews with a couple of people, but only one person mentioned this. So I was a bit surprised, because it seems like quite a big story. But since it was only one person, I had only one story to go from. And so I tried to research a bit more. and finding some papers and to get to know what actually happened. But still, it's, in my opinion, it's still quite a vague story because it was so little, there were so little reports from it. And also, yeah, the hackers even told media papers or media outlets that they succeeded while they didn't actually succeed, or they succeeded partly. So it was a, yeah, something I stumbled upon, actually, yes.
Great, thank you. I only see 2 questions in the chat, and one of the questions was similar to this one. So what was the most surprising thing in your research about the early days of the Belgian internet? And I think this was it.
Yes, and second, for me, because I'm still quite young, I'm only born after most of the things happened, is that in the beginning, in Belgium, private persons, so if I wanted to make my own website, I was not allowed to do that until 2000. So that also has an influence on research when, for example, web archiving for the 90s, well, private persons won't be found on the Belgium internet. So that is also something I found quite surprising.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if we stay with Bas for a minute, I see a question from John Karlstedt Tonnesen from the Norwegian Web Archive, who says he has a similar master degree in web history, focusing on the popularization of the web in a Norwegian context. When a Friday night primetime talk show started to serve websites during their broadcast in February 1995, the interest for web media really exploded. Have you found traces of any similar igniting events that might have triggered such popularization of web media in Belgium? So is there any event that really got things going in Belgium?
Not really. I think the internet got attention was by politicians in Belgium, because they quickly figured out that the internet or web pages were a very interesting medium for them, because they had a broader reach and even a younger reach. So I think that are really the first parties or actors that has started of making the internet in Belgium popular. But really an event like described there, I haven't really found yet. But it's possible because I'm still not finished with my research, so maybe.
Let's switch to the Lifranum group. I see a question in the chat as well. And I want to start it with that question from Amanda Lehmann. How do you handle the relationship between authors and their works? Do you include anonymous works, and how do you treat anonymous creations? I think it's a very interesting question. So maybe Alexandre or Christian can elaborate on this. Oh, he wants to, we can, yeah. Robin, no, he says to answer it live. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yes, this is a difficult point because on the web, the idea of work is not the same. Of course, there is some website launched by a publisher or for authors who want to promote their works. So it's traditional works. But you can also see that there is people who want to show their work in progress, you know, and sometimes we can see that they invite writers to their own blogs, their own websites, so they can share text from a site to another. So it's difficult to trace it, and for another answer that I can give is that there's no catalog of the web archive, of course. And it's difficult to notice what is the work. In fact, is it just a text, or is it the relationship between the writers and the readers? Is it the website, the whole website? That is a good question. Maybe Christian can answer too, of course.
In a way to detect these different authors, we have built a methodology to represent social networks, and by relation between the different authors, we have elaborated a specific social network that represents all the relation between the authors, and this is a way to discover new authors, because some authors say that another author is an author, and then we have elaborated the registry in this way before crawling.
Well, what you can see, and it was difficult for the research team, is that people who write on the web can sometimes write literature and other times political text, you know, like on social media. So when the research team tried to extract text, they found that it's not all about literature, you know. So when they want to analyze and launch data mining on the text, it was a problem for them to know when it's literature and when it's not. And it's not so simple, of course.
Yes, we have considered that if one person that is an author says that another person is an author, then they are authors. And then it's very difficult to determine what is literature exactly in web. Then the bypass orations is the only way to decide that this is literature.
And do you want to do this again over time, like in a year or so, to see how it evolved, or is this a one-time research?
Yeah, it's a one-shot collection. We already called a lot of the web entity of the Lifranum project, of course, but maybe half of them were unknown from the BNF. So it's a great opportunity to the library to enrich the collection, of course. But it's a one-shot because it was interesting for us to produce a web archive less than 1 terabyte in order to provide a full text search to readers, you know, because the other collection are everybody is in the same WARC files, you know, selection from literature department and other departments, so it's difficult to index for full text search all the data. So that's why we decided to launch this crawl, and also for the BNF to launch a broader crawl than the Lifranum project, than the one that the researchers made, because we had some websites that are known from the BNF, but not in the network, because the researcher focus isn't on the network between writers. And so we added some publisher website and review website, because we think that this web archive could be and should be reused.
And do most researchers come to the university for further research on this, or they can also go to the BNF? Or is this set in two places?
There is some difference between the two archives. For the Lifranum project, this is essentially literary production. For the BNF, this is larger. This is the literature world or domain, including review and things like that. And for the Lifranum project, we have centered on literary production. with authors identified.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think I will just move to Helena and Juan-José now, because there are not any questions for you yet. But first, to the audience, please, if you have another question, feel free to put one in the Q&A tab and upvote the questions. But I wanted to ask, because you, Helena and Juan-José, you spoke about the Reborn Digital Archival Edition, and I'm fairly new to this. So first of all, could you maybe elaborate a bit more on that? Like, what is it? And I was wondering, because you were speaking of some kind of model that you wanted to use, could it also be possible to reuse it on a larger scale for other, for example, national libraries that are listening here today as well?
Well, first, the idea is that it can be reused, but the problem is the effort to collect or to gather data all together, because having all the traces together, it takes a lot of time. And since now you don't have any automatic tool that allows you to get the traces, this is maybe one of the issues. You need lots of time to gather all the traces together. And the other question was, the first question, excuse me?
The first question was, what is an RDAE? So what is a Reborn Digital Archive Collection?
RDA, yeah. The concept of RDA is to collect or to have a new object, a new digital object, joining traces from archives. And we put in this presentation an example of an Irish politician who lost his website or was closed, and to try to get again all the traces, we need to explore for one side the National Library Web Archive and Net Archive to have a complete pack of data together. So the concept of Reborn is, okay, we have lost information, we need to create a new one following traces from different places.
Yeah, that makes sense. But as you said, it's very time consuming, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's very time consuming, because you have to look for different information, not only for, in this case, we have put an example of the Michael Higgins, but it's not only to look for the name, but also for the events he has done, press notes that may be archived, everything.
Yeah.
All sorts of data that are published or where he has been part of this news, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. And I was wondering, because for myself, I work more in preservation of digital objects, so preservation of web archives as well. And for us at the KB, it's very important to have like context information, like more about how the object was made, for who it was intended. Do you have something familiar for that as well, for these editions?
Well, the context is a problem always, because it's very easy, first of all, to lose the context, or to have a different context from what you are looking for. So you need to especially have a focus in what are you exactly looking for have that to be adequate context to have this RDA.
So Juan-José, I wonder I can come in here a bit as well. So this is where I'm coming into the collaborative project, as well as the descriptive metadata that goes with these collections. So for anyone who's signed up for the in-person conference, you might have seen there's a workshop I'm running with Emily Maimura on using data sheets for data sets to describe web archive collections. So the findings we get from it, we're doing a number of workshops, the same workshops, and we're going to then, after we've completed them, make some recommendations on what metadata is applicable from that framework that can be applied to web archives, and then that will then feed into this bigger project as well. So there will be detailed metadata going alongside the Reborn digital objects as well.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating on that, Elena. And I also saw a question from an anonymous attendee, but he or she says, I can't wait to hear more about the data sheets for data sets. But the question also is, did I understand correctly that you found 30 original or unique press statements from the Internet Archive? And did you acquire that data of your own collection?
So that's Sharon's research, and I think maybe with time zones we got a bit confused. But you can just pull in the links from those web archives. So it would be the National Library of Ireland web archive, which is open access, and then the Internet Archive open access as well. And just any open access URLs you can pull into the framework that we're suggesting as well, because using open source tools like Zotero and Omeka to present the information.
Okay, great. And I heard in your pre-recorded
work files, it's just all
yeah.
it's the other web archives that have got the work files and the preservation copy.
Yeah, exactly. I did hear in your pre-recorded talk that you wanted to share the results at the RESOL conference. And I was wondering, as your workshop is full and I'm attending next week as well, will there be an online option? Because there will be people listening now as well who are very interested in the
yeah.
as well.
So we can't do an online option because there's in the current framework there's 7 subjects with about 31 questions. And in the workshop, it's quite intense of talking with a partner sorting through the questions. Some of the questions are really big. So it doesn't work well for the online format. That's why it's in person only, which I know limits participation. And there's also been a workshop gone through with DPC members as well. But it's just because of the nature of the questions that need to be reviewed. A bigger online, it doesn't work for online, and then also we can't increase the capacity above what we currently have because it just, you wouldn't have any time for any real meaningful discussion then.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But please share your results with us.
Yeah. But also we'll be sharing just our processes as well of coming up with these suggestions as well. So if people wanted to, they could use that as a model then for other workshops and other research, because the framework could probably be used to describe other digital collections as well, either digitized or born digital.
Great, thank you. I want to move to a question for Christian because it gets quite a lot of upvotes from Jeffrey van der Hoeven. He says, dear Christian, with the wide variety of tools you mentioned in the presentation on analyzing web content used by researchers, you also demand more from researchers' skills. Is that an issue? And if so, how do you cope with that? So expecting more technical skills from researchers or embarking a programmer to the research team?
Yes, we have 2 engineers, one in BNF and one in March, each for 1 year. The first was essentially in human science, in literature. But with knowledge about XML and all the tools we have used to record the address, the URLs of the author. And the second was in BNF, in Kevin Locoh-Donou, and he has making the other part of the research essentially using Iipc automatic tool and analysis after the Iipc crawl, the Iipc analysis. Then 2 persons. Alexandre.
But in my mind, the question is about researcher skills, but also librarian skills. But we have given assistance to researchers when they want to use Heuretrix, of course. But I should say that Iipc is a friendly user tools, as Zotero. It's already used by the academic community in France. So I think it's interesting to try to join Web Archive with this kind of tools that already works on the living web. So it could help. Because the skills that you're gonna get, you can reuse it for other projects. So for the librarian and for the researcher, it's more interesting to learn.
There are more questions for you, Alexander and Christian. Friedel says, your approach is really interesting, especially the use of Hive tool to find previously uncovered sources to archive. A few questions. Are you considering to work with Hive systematically at BNF? Are the script documentations about working with Hive and extracting content for the WARC files available somewhere? How did you define contextual information in your project? There are lots of questions. And to include in your company collection, and how did you get about doing a network analysis based on the XML scheme? So I think the first ones are for the BNF actually.
Yeah.
But maybe you can both answer. Are you considering to work with it systematically? Yes.
Yeah, maybe I will answer about Hive, yes, because it's I couldn't say that. Yeah, we worked a lot on these tools. It has been developed by Sciences Po. Sciences Po is a partner in another project, the Reborn project. The IT people and the BNF has give us the ability, the possibility to launch Hive on the web archive. So it's very interesting because you can also analyze the web archives with these tools as a researcher can do it with the living web. So you can analyze the network, and we know that there is some important website, but they are no more on the web, and they are not at all in the Lifranum web archives, but they are in all other web archives. So with Hive, you can also see the website in the network and all the websites. So, and there is also in the thematic department colleagues that are using Hive in order to develop collection, to make better selections. And I think it's useful when you want to archive not just a list of websites, but a network. There's another question about copyright, but okay, of course, it doesn't change anything about copyright. Okay, the texts are on copyrighted still, but that's a reason, maybe the main reason we decided to launch two crawls, because now the researcher can work on their own WARC files, because they have produced their own WARC files, and the BNF has produced the other WARC files. It's another collection. Okay. What is online? Actually, it's the registry called Weblit that you can find online. So it's a registry from the authors and website blogs from these authors, and it's interesting because some authors could have both several profiles, several websites and blogs. So okay.
Yes, for the Lifranum project, our archive in the university is restricted only for researcher and person with an archive or something like. And actually, we work on indexation and the definition of language to organize data.
About the first question, how did you go about doing a network analysis based on the XML scheme? In fact, we use Hive to see the networks, and we export the data, so the data are available. But the question for us was, do we the BNF provide guided tour to in the reading room, so to explore the collection. And the question was, why not for this collection try something different based on the network more than selection, human selection. But it's only in our mind.
And we stick for a little bit at the Lifranum project. I see from an anonymous participant, is the Hertrix training you provided for the researchers available for reuse? Might be useful for people who wish to get started with Hertrix.
Oh, no. Sorry.
Are you considering this?
Yeah, it's the project began in 2020, so it was a COVID-19 time. So that's why it was done by our colleagues, Iipc people, Sarah Aubry and Bert van Landen, who were in touch with researcher in Lyon, and it was done. It was a remote training, you know.
There's another question for our boss. What got you started researching the early Belgian web?
Well, firstly, it was a topic I could choose from for my master's thesis, and I was interested in it. So I contacted my promoter, Julie Birkholz, and she then introduced me to Friedel from the Royal Library of Belgium. And then it was very interesting. It sparked my attention immediately, and I wanted to know everything that was to know. And I was quite surprised that there wasn't really anything written down yet at the moment. So I am trying to take that task and complete it to the best of my abilities.
And I saw you were looking at both the France and the Netherlands as well for their history of the web. If you compare the Belgian situation, you already have an idea of where Belgium stands in the European context.
Well, behind, obviously, because there isn't written anything down yet. But I mostly talked with someone from the Netherlands, with Kees Cezelski. And Anders Klint from the Danish Royal Library about web archiving, because that was at first a part of my master's thesis. Also something we Belgians can learn a lot about these other countries and how web archiving goes there. But since the scope of my thesis already became a bit too large, I had to drop that part. So that's really something, but I want to take that on in the future because I'm still really interested in it.
I was also wondering, is there anything that you stumbled upon across the way that you were like, I wished I knew this before when I started, and not halfway?
That's a good question. I think it's probably again these rules, because at first when I started when I researched a bit of the web archiving, I found some books in the Royal Library, but I noticed that they were all businesses. And I found that strange, but I really didn't think about it, so I accepted it. And later, when I found out these rules, they apply everywhere, and that's why that happened, I was like, oh, yeah, of course, I should have thought of that. So yeah, that's I think mostly it.
Okay, and last question for you, Bas, for me at least. You mentioned that you were still going to have some interviews at the end of your pre-recorded talk. Did any of them already take place, and did it provide you new insights?
No, not really, because of the time. But I already have a list of about, I think, 12 people that should be interviewed. Some of my own university who brought the internet and computers at the Ghent University, but also persons who worked at KU Leuven, who were the administrators of the national domain, and also with Robert Cailleux, who was one of the founders of the World Wide Web, also Belgian, studied at Ghent University. So it's a dream to have someone like that for an interview, of course. But that's something for the future.
You have something to look forward to.
Yes,
and when
exactly.
you're done, you have a very big audience who wants to read your master thesis. So you can share it with all of us.
I hope so.
I saw another question in the Q&A from Pamela for the Reborn Digital Archive group, as she calls it. How are you describing or sharing collection provenance, that is, your methods for developing this archive with eventual users? Are you doing this at the level of the collection in addition to descriptive metadata of the captures?
Sharon, do you want to come in for this one?
Sharon is with us, I see.
Yeah, it's actually internet connection issues.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Welcome, Sharon. Hi.
I missed the question and I'm still just getting my captions on there. And my internet's really bad. I'm very sorry. Show subtitles. Okay, show beautiful. No, show subtitles. That's great. Oh, I can see myself talking now. I'm sorry, I missed the question. Was I supposed to come in there?
I can repeat it for you. The question was, how are you describing or sharing collection provenance? That is, your methods for developing this archive with eventual users. Are you doing this at the level of the collection in addition to descriptive metadata of the captures?
Yeah, wait, let me see. I'm not going to put my camera because in case I click on. I think for the start there, we're using a collection that is already in a library catalogue, number one. It's already then in a kind of the web archive as well as archive it. So we're kind of maintaining all of those reference points within the collection itself at both item level and then at collection level. Now, because we're splitting the corpus between the Internet Archive and the NLI Web Archive, the Internet Archive does not have a kind of a catalogue reference or anything like that. So our best hope is to keep documenting as we go and to do paradata. And the paradata itself then will be part of our data set. And therefore we will document not only where we found it, but also how we made it and so on, and to try and put provenance and paradata together. Does that make sense?
For me, it does. I hope for Pamela as well. If it doesn't, then she can add another question to the Q&A. And we'll stick with you for a bit longer because there's another question for you guys as well. You mentioned that you created additional metadata. Did this take a long time and did you do it manually or did you develop scripts to help you? And do you think this is an approach you'll use for the other collections as well?
Well, for one, we're taking an approach towards non-programmers, so we won't be using scripts, and I won't be using scripts either because I find it very problematic for me. And the whole reason was having tried to learn Python, I tried to learn something else, and I just said, you know, and I was doing it in spreadsheets as well at the beginning. And so Zotero then, you know, came in then with collaboration with Helena and Juan-José. So I was really lost at the start of this project and only for their guidance at the stage that we're at. To answer that then, the script side of metadata, no. Helena Byrne is looking at a workshop now for actually how we might describe data sets with Emily May Mora. We're going to take their insights and we're going to go back to the drawing board and we're going to address that in our metadata. But remember, we're trying to make a method for people who have, you know, limited technical skills. And that's the whole point, because I have limited technical skills. So it's really a way to kind of overcome that. And by using, you know, library catalog, you know, metadata standards and digital archive metadata standards have been around for some time. And so why shouldn't we use, you know, digital humanities tools that are there specifically for that reason? And to make corpuses that we can not only figure out how they're made, that people can actually export the whole data set out of Zotero into their own Zotero and do their own analysis. So it was just to try and make something that was, you know, a little bit easier on novices and a little bit easier on me. And then having Juan-José Boté with his background in information science, and Healy with her background in web archives especially, we were able to kind of trash these things through and come up with something that can be maybe repeatable and probably put as a lesson maybe in library carpentry or Jaria teacher or somewhere like that. And then look at it like a multilingual resource at the end and kind of figure out things like, you know, how does that, you know, clash then with you know, Zotero and Omeka and things like that aren't necessarily multilingual themselves. So we've a lot of things to get through, but I think that we have a solid start, to be honest, and certainly with the, you know, with the collaboration has really helped.
And I was wondering to have a last question for you guys as well, because you mentioned that you were not as far in the project as you hoped in the pre-recorded talk. Did you catch up? And what are the future steps, actually?
Well, they were not as far on because I hit a brick wall. And so it was really then to try and bring the three of us together from our different disciplines and say, okay, how can we help each other? You know, so we're also waiting on Helena Byrne to do a workshop in the Iipc on the live one, and we're waiting for her wonderful results to inform us as well. So there was the fact that it's taken us. I started this project in 2018, at the end of like early 2018, and I did it in spreadsheets. And halfway through that year, almost by September, the NLI Web Archive in the the International Memory Foundation disappeared. So it was start this again and do it right and bring on collaborators because we're trying to overcome that problem. What do you do when my entire spreadsheet it was for my PhD thesis, it didn't make it, but my entire database was set in broken links. You know, I wasn't going to work that way. So we had a look kind of at a way then to say there was going to be a little bit more preservation, number one, that even if we took screenshots of web pages and something else, you know, something happened, you know, in the future, we would still have those records.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't see any questions in the Q&A anymore. So if there is there was one, just in the nick of time there. Because we were almost rounding up, but I think we can do the last question for Bas. Has your research changed your way of viewing the internet as it is now? As someone who also wasn't born yet when the internet started, I noticed that people who did experience the start of the internet view the possibilities of the internet differently than me. What is your experience as by Lieve Battens?
Yes, because for me, the internet was always a given. It was always there. I've always known it. But when I look back at the history and see how quite random it came to be, it was just a matter of some scientists who were very interested in experimenting with technology, with computers. And it just by luck traveled overseas. And grew until the enormous thing and something we all use every day as of today. So in that way, it has opened my eyes in that something like that internet is really not a given. And I've actually learned a lot about that.
Okay, thank you very much. I see a question from Sharon. But it's only to the hosts and the panelists, so I can see it, but not the audience. So it is a quick question for Bas. Did you consider looking at Belnet and the Belgium Internet Exchange Point? Lots of history there, she mentioned.
Yes, I briefly looked at it because it was there was a lot of discussion of how this research network had to be, because just very quickly, there were two opposing parties with different internet protocols. One was the internet technology, and there was an European one. And so they actually had, there was a lot of money used, a lobby, a political discussion. It was, as we know today, the internet at one. But Belnet is an interesting example because it took about 5 years or 4 or 5 years to actually be created, because simply there were that much politicians involved, and discussions were made that it was also in the newspapers that Belgium is the last country that hasn't got such a research network. So yeah, I looked at it because it is really interesting.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's it. We have to wrap up. Time flies when you're having fun. So this was session 1. I want to thank all the speakers very much. So thank you for attending. Thank you also for the audience and for your wonderful questions.